Victoria, give us a brief summary of House Bill 2784, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, members of the committee. House Bill 2784 creates the Task Force on Oversight of Financial Institutions receiving funds from the Troubled Asset Relief Program to evaluate need for regulation of state-regulated entities receiving funds. Sunsets Task Force on date of convening next regular biennial legislative session, effective on passage.
Thank you. And Representative Shields is up first.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, members of the committee. For the record, my name is Chip Shields. I represent District 43, North and Northeast Portland. House Bill 2784 is a bipartisan bill co-sponsored by Representative Greg Smith, Senator Boquist, Senator Larry George, and others. And the purpose is to provide oversight of how funds are spent by state-chartered banks who received funds from under the Troubled Asset Relief Program under the Emergency Economic Stabilization Act of 2008. The bill is about setting up a systematic process whereby the legislature can ask questions about the TARP program in the public forum to improve our banking environment for business and consumers. The topic is timely. Here in Oregon, we saw 2 banks fail this last year, Silver Falls in Representative Gilliam's district, and Pinnacle Bank in Beaverton, where Representative Harker's business banked. 2 other banks in Oregon have received cease and desist letters. Now, what's troubling about these failures in our banking community is not so much that banks fail. After all, banks do fail in a recession. But it's that these failures have come at times when over the last 2 or 3 years, we have been assured by the United Financial Lobby or the Oregon Bankers Association that things were all right here, that Oregon was different, that the problems were all at the federal level, and in the mortgage mess, it was that Oregon didn't have the same foreclosure problems as California, Nevada, and Florida. And of course, today we do. Oregon is number 5 in foreclosures and rising all the time. Now, I don't begrudge a group of businesses coming together to promote a point of view in ways that benefit their interests. And after all, who can blame them for trying to calm their depositors and investors in these trying times? But it's our job to cut through the spin, to ask questions, and provide the proper oversight and transparency our system needs so that taxpayer money is well spent and that businesses and consumers that depend on healthy banks can thrive. All I'm trying to say to you, colleagues, is that we've got to do the work because others won't do it for us. I filed this bill early in the session when TARP 2 was being developed and when it was unclear how many local banks would pursue and receive TARP dollars. The Oregon Bankers Association, which includes big federally chartered national banks like Bank of America, as well as the 35 state chartered banks, indicated their early opposition to the bill. So I've met with the representatives and representatives of 2 of the 3 banks that are currently receiving TARP dollars under the Capital Purchase Program. They provided a significant part of the information I requested, and I appreciate that. And I considered whether or not to move forward with the bill. And I talked to people who know the industry, and after that review, decided that, yes, a bill is needed, and I'd like to tell you why. The main reason is that the federal government is not doing a good job of oversight on this issue. The General Accounting Office and congressional oversight reports show a program in disarray. Treasury has no real published guidelines for determining who gets TARP dollars and who doesn't. McClatchy newspapers state, quote, "The massive programs designed to rescue the nation's financial sector are operating without adequate oversight, with vague goals and limited disclosure of their details to the taxpayers who are paying for them." The GAO report talked of inconsistent oversight. And in the wake of the GAO report, House Minority Leader John Boehner, the Republican from Ohio, said, quote, "No one has any idea where the money is going or how much is left or where it went." Mr. Chair, members of the committee, it is the state's charge to regulate state-chartered banks. And what I'm trying to say to you is that we've got to do the work because the federal government is not going to do it for us, and we're going to have to find the facts on our own. And the frustration here in Oregon is mounting. On Friday, Portland developer Tom Moyer and Hoffman Construction announced that they are ceasing construction on a development that employed 350 construction workers. According to Ryan Frank of the Oregonian, Moyer's financial woes show that even though the U.S. Treasury pumps billions of dollars, and these are his words, billions of dollars into banks, that cash is not landing in the hands of the people who need it, and lenders' reluctance means construction workers may not receive a paycheck. The vice president of Hoffman Construction said, quote, "I get a little mad about it. The banks are getting the money, but they're not lending it out." Now, absolutely, we don't want to encourage or putting pressure on banks to make risky loans, and Moyer's project may well be risky. But the point here is that the public has questions, and they look to their elected representatives to answer them. And this bill is simply a systematic way to go about the process of asking those questions. So I told you about the opposition. What's the status of the bill today? Well, I met with the Oregon Bankers Association, heard their concerns, particularly about the potential stigma surrounding TARP funding. And the compromise that I suggested would strip out the task force structure completely and language on recommendations on regulation. It seemed like overkill since there was only likely to be 3 banks that are likely to receive the funding. Instead, I have Legislative Counsel working on a draft amendment that will state the following, something along these lines, that the House Consumer Protection Committee and Senate Consumer Protection Committee shall conduct hearings on the progress achieved by financial institutions as defined in the ORS that are licensed, certified, or chartered in the state and that receive TARP fundings. These banks could simply use this as an opportunity to come before you and tell you their story. They could simply bring the reports that they're sending to Treasury anyway and discuss them with us. Now, there is precedent for this approach of using statute to require interim committees to review an issue. House Bill 2981 in House Judiciary, of which Representative Krieger is a co-sponsor and Representative Cameron is the chief co-sponsor, requires a legislative committee to study and recommend changes in occupational licensing for people with criminal convictions. This would be a very similar approach. I'm saddened that the Oregon Bankers Association has rejected what I feel to be a very reasonable compromise. So it's up to you to decide whether a systematic way to ask questions during the interim is appropriate. And at the end of the day, I think this bill is about answering 3 key questions. Question number 1, do you think that the federal government has done a good job in providing oversight of your TARP dollars? Question number 2, do you think the legislature has the right to ask questions about how our TARP dollars are spent by state chartered banks? Question number 3, do you think it would benefit the public to systematically ask those questions in the light of day, with the public being able to be educated along the way, and with the public being able to testify and prevent their viewpoints too? If you believe we have the right, the duty, to ask those questions, I ask you to vote yes once we get back the amendment. Thank you, Mr. Chair, and I'd be happy to introduce the 2 people that will be calling in by phone when you're ready.
Okay, questions for Representative Shields? Before we make that call, Representative, I'm just kind of curious. I don't know, a tremendous amount about the TARP, except what I've followed on the news, the TARP funds and all of that. And I'm not aware of what any federal regulations on the TARP funds, and I guess our ability to actually look at those regulations that the federal government have put out. I'm sure it's mostly public document. Have you looked at any of that specifically?
Well, Mr. Chair, there's the Treasury oversees the TARP program, and they've been providing some reports, and then the General Accounting Office and the Congressional Oversight Committee have been also looking at those, and I think part of the challenge is that there hasn't been a whole lot of disclosure and transparency in that, and hopefully that'll improve, and with this bill, it would give the banks that receive this money a chance to come before Oregon and tell their story.
I guess what I was trying to get at, I guess I'm not aware of what the requirements from the federal government were to the banks receiving TARP funds and what they should do with the funds.
Well, that's the
banks.
question of the day. The application for TARP funding was, I think, 2 pages long. Most people filled it out in about 20